Jirren stood in the middle of Xavier International University's main plaza, surrounded by the chaos of freshman orientation. Banners flapped in the breeze. Students buzzed with nervous energy and wide-eyed excitement. Some took selfies by the fountain. Others clutched campus maps like lifelines. He had been here before. The air tasted the same sun-warmed pavement and campus coffee, lingering from the kiosk near the admin building. A group of students nearby laughed too loudly, and the scent of youthful hope hung thick in the air. Even the way the trees swayed, lazy and unbothered, felt like a cruel joke. He remembered this day with painful clarity. 10 years ago he had stood in this very spot, Heartlight, future unwritten, looking around with a sense of wonder, of possibility. He remembered how it felt to be full of dreams and naivete, ready to fall, ready to love. He had no idea then that love could also be the weapon. This time, he wasn't here to fall. His hands clenched into fists inside his hoodie pocket. His knuckles ached. His nails bit into his palms, but he welcomed the sting. It was the only thing tethering him to now. The familiar scent of newly waxed tiles, paper flyers, and cold coffee drifted around him. The exact same cleaning fluid from a decade ago clung to the air like time hadn't moved at all. A girl in a denim jacket bumped into him and muttered an apology. He didn't respond. His eyes remained locked on the fountain ahead, where he'd once taken photos with his new classmates, including Russel. That name still hurt to think. Everything was the same, exactly the same, except him. His soul felt older, bruised, hardened in places where it used to be soft. He carried 10 years of ache in a body that no longer fit the time it had returned to. Like a soul shoved back into the skin of its innocence, forced to relive everything it once blindly welcomed. But he wouldn't. He couldn't, because he knew what came next, where the first accidental encounter would happen, when Russel would say his first words to him, how their eyes would meet across a lecture hall, how Jirren would think those eyes were the start of something sacred, how wrong he had been. Russel would smile, just once, and that smile would ruin everything. Not this time. Jirren exhaled sharply and turned away from the direction of the gymnasium and took the long route to his department building, avoiding the shortcut that led to the bench near the library, the bench where it had all begun, where Russel had first sat beside him, asked for a pen, nudged his shoulder, laughed at his awkward stutter, took his hand without warning, without asking, and made it feel like it belonged there. He'd memorized that moment like scripture. Now, he walked past it like it was a cursed altar. He'd already rewritten that moment, or so he thought. Jirren sat in the third row from the back, hoodie up, notebook open, head down. The lecture hall buzzed with the kind of nervous energy only the first week of college could summon, students chatting, seats squeaking, papers rustling, laughter echoing off high walls. But Jirren wasn't here to make friends. He wasn't here to laugh. He wasn't even here to learn. He was here to survive. His fingers were tight around his pen, but he wasn't writing, just drawing tight spirals in the margins of his blank page. His head stayed lowered, not out of shyness, but control. His eyes remained on the paper because looking anywhere else risked unraveling everything. He knew what time it was, what minute, what second. He'd memorized it. His heart already ached with the weight of what was about to happen. The moment he dreaded had arrived, and he could feel the universe bracing for it, too, holding its breath, preparing to mock him. He heard the left side door open. Light from the hallway spilled into the room, silencing the murmur of the class like a snapped string. Footsteps echoed inside, slow, measured, confident. Jirren didn't glance up. He didn't need to. He knew. He felt it. Russel had entered. Even after 10 years, the effect was instant. His body remembered before his mind could resist. His skin prickled. The hairs on his arms stood up. His chest tightened in a way that was familiar and infuriating, like gravity itself tilted toward the door. It was happening all over again, and Jirren was powerless against it. He squeezed his pen harder, the plastic creaking under the pressure. No, he wasn't going to look. He wouldn't be that boy again. Not the boy who turned when Russel walked in. Not the boy who blushed under his gaze. Not the fool who thought a smirk could be a promise. Not this time. But then the professor's voice rang out, sharp and clear from the front of the room. Mr. Russel V. Marquez, your seat is here, front and center, as usual. Jirren froze. It was like a switch flipped inside him, a memory forced to the surface by a single sentence. The same seat, front row, third from the left. The one that would become his domain. The one where Russel would lounge like a king in a throne. Where he'd shoot glances over his shoulder. Where he'd smirk during lectures. Where he'd mouth things like, "I'm bored. Want coffee later?" As if coffee meant anything other than touching knees under the table and fingers grazing too long. That seat was a trap disguised as routine. Jirren blinked hard, his lashes brushing the rim of his glasses. His stomach turned, his vision blurred. Don't look, don't breathe, don't feel. He dug his pen into the page and scribbled harder. The spirals becoming frantic now, no longer shapes, just scratches, like he could carve his pain into the paper, instead of letting it live inside his chest. The chair in front creaked as someone lowered into it. A deep breath somewhere nearby. A shift in the room's energy. Even the silence felt like it knew something had changed. It would have been easier if Russel had ignored him, if he had walked by without noticing. If time had undone the thread that once tethered them to each other. But then a voice. Low, smooth, careless, and impossibly familiar. Interesting. Just one word, just a murmur, but it struck like thunder. It was said softly. Not to the class, not to the professor. Just loud enough for Jirren to hear. His pen slipped from his grip and rolled off the desk. He didn't even bother to pick it up. His heart slammed against his ribs. So loud he swore it echoed in the room. He gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles white, breathing shallow. The world narrowed down to that one sound, that one voice. It crawled up his spine like a memory he didn't want but couldn't forget. Russel's voice. Exactly the same. No older, no colder. Just him. But Jirren didn't turn around. He didn't react. Not visibly, at least. He sat there, frozen in a body that had betrayed him for years. Heart racing in a room that didn't understand what was at stake. He kept his gaze locked on the smudged edge of his desk, on the mess of graphite scribbled in his notebook. He counted 3 dots of ink at the bottom of the page, focused on them. Used them like an anchor. Dot, dot, dot. Just breathe. Just pretend you don't know him. He could feel Russel's eyes on him. Not casual glances. Not the flicker of curiosity. Noah stare. Sharp. Intrigued. Probing. And why wouldn't he stare? In this timeline, Jirren had done everything wrong. He hadn't reacted when Russel entered. Hadn't looked up. Hadn't smiled. Hadn't fallen. Not even a blink of acknowledgement. And for someone like Russel V. Marquez, the golden boy of Xavier, the one who people practically tripped over themselves to impress, Jirren's silence would have felt like a slap. He hoped it did, but it didn't make him feel powerful. It made him feel sick, like he was walking a tightrope over the exact same pain. Only now he had to balance while pretending the fall didn't terrify him. He thought of the first time they met. The real one. 10 years ago. How Russel had dropped his bag and sat beside him, even though there were seats everywhere. How he'd offered a half-melted caramel candy and said, "You look like someone who needs sugar." How Jirren had laughed nervously and refused the candy, but kept thinking about it all day. And how later that week, they kissed. Just once. Behind the student.org booth, at dusk. Soft. Quick. Dangerous. That one kiss had lit the fuse, the one that would burn for years, the one that would destroy him. But none of that had happened yet, not here. Not now. And it never would. Not if Jirren had anything to say about it. His body stayed perfectly still, every muscle coiled, his breath shallow. Sweat prickled at the back of his neck, hidden under his hoodie. The class went on, but he barely heard a word. The professor was talking about academic policies and syllabi. Students laughed occasionally. Someone raised a hand to ask about a textbook, but all Jirren heard was the ghost of Russel's voice echoing in his head. Interesting. That teneso casual, so sure meant, Russel had noticed. Worse, it meant he cared. That was the thing about Russel. He wasn't just possessive, he was obsessive. He didn't chase attention because he needed either, chased it because it was owed to him. And Jirren had just committed a sin. He hadn't offered his gaze. He hadn't flinched. He hadn't let himself be pulled into orbit. And Russel noticed. Of course he did. Jirren's stomach churned. He wasn't ready for this. He thought he could prepare for it avoidance schedules, detour maps, eye contact bans, but nothing prepared him for hearing that voice again. For being seen by that voice. He wanted to run. But that would be worse. That would confirm something. That would hand Russel the thread and let him pull. No, he had to sit there and pretend. Pretend like his heart wasn't splitting. Pretend like he hadn't once traced Russel's shoulder blades with his fingertips at 3 a.m., whispering secrets into skin. Pretend like he didn't still dream of the way Russel had touched him, rough but reverent, like possession and prayer. Pretend like he wasn't remembering how it all ended, with a ring on someone else's finger, and a look on Russel's face that said this was never going to be yours. So Jirren kept his head down, his breath even, his face blank. And even as his chest throbbed and the edges of his vision blurred with the weight of it all, he didn't turn around. The days that followed were a minefield, not because of anything explosive on the outside. Xavier International University remained as pristine and orderly as ever, but because of the danger buried in routines, in glances, in the patterns Jirren knew would play out if he didn't act first. So he became meticulous. He created a war plan. On the second night of classes, Jirren sat alone in the library. A campus map spread out before him, colored highlighter tabs sticking out from the pages of his planner like feathers. His pen scratched across the paper, mapping routes, estimating crowd times, marking blind corners like a soldier preparing for ambush. He already knew Russel's schedule better than Russel probably did, thanks to overheard conversations, social media posts, and the way some upperclassmen gossiped about Russel's legendary attendance pattern. Business calculus at 8 a.m. Monday to Wednesday. Philosophy 101 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 11 a.m. sharp. Swimming at 4 p.m. Fridays, because of course he swam off. Course he'd be shirtless, laughing, dripping, surrounded. Jirren stayed 10 steps ahead. He transferred out of philosophy, switched his lunch break, took the back stairs, even if it meant an extra 5-minute walk. He even stopped visiting the vending machines near the faculty building, because Russel once passed there 3 times in one day. By the weekend, Jirren had erased their overlap so well it felt surgical. The thing was, he had done this before. Not the avoidance, but the orbit. 10 years ago, Jirren used to arrange his schedule so he could bump into Russel, so he could sit across the library table at the right moment, so he could catch that lopsided smile that made him forget how to breathe. He used to memorize Russel's likes, his tells, his moods like a language he desperately wanted to learn. Now he used that fluency to run, to build walls instead of bridges. And yet it was never enough. Because the universe, cruel and bored, seemed determined to remind him that destiny had a sick sense of humor. He kept his head down, his circle tight. Nayahi's roommate and childhood friend noticed the change. "You used to be so talkative. What happened?" she asked one night, eating ramen on her bed, steam rising to fog her glasses. Jirren was sitting at his desk, reorganizing his notes for a class he had already aced in a past life. He didn't look up. "I just want to focus." Naya stared at him a little too long. "You know," she said slowly, "you used to say that when you were heartbroken." Jirren's fingers paused over a page. "I'm not heartbroken," he replied. But his voice was thin, too careful. Naya didn't press. She just sighed and handed him her half-finished cup of tea like a peace offering. He took it with a grateful nod, but the warmth in his hands did nothing to ease the ache in his chest. Classes were easier than emotions. Jirren buried himself in lectures, assignments, and the kind of busy work that didn't ask questions. He became that student, the quiet, attentive, early bird who took notes in color-coded ink and sat near the windows, away from the noise. Professors loved him. Peers forgot him, exactly how he wanted it. Except he could feel it. The shift in the air. Every few days, a presence would pass behind him, slow and deliberate. His skin would crawl with familiarity, and his lungs would forget how to function. Russel was watching him. He wasn't sure how he knew. He didn't turn to check. He didn't acknowledge it. But it was there like a scent he couldn't scrub off. A heat he couldn't unfeel. And it wasn't accidental. Because if there was one thing Russel didn't tolerate, it was being ignored. He avoided club booths and skipped campus mixers altogether. When he saw the posters for the photography club's orientation complete with images, he remembered editing himself in another life. He quietly walked past them. Back then, Joining that club had been a dream. He and Russel had spent hours developing photos in the darkroom, whispering in the shadows, sharing stolen kisses behind stacks of negatives. It was sacred. It was theirs. Now, it was poisoned. So he dropped it before it began. He avoided parties, didn't go near the gym, refused any group work that had Russel's name attached. People noticed. Whispers started. Did you see how he walked away when Russel sat down? Do they know each other? Is that the only guy on campus who doesn't worship Russel Marquez? But Jirren didn't care. Let them talk. Let them think he was antisocial, strange, rude. Let them think anything so long as they didn't see the truth. That Jirren was avoiding the only person who had ever broken him so thoroughly that not even time could erase the scars. And still, fate found cracks in his armor. One afternoon in the cafeteria, Jirren arrived early to eat. He always chose a table near the far end under, a flickering light fixture, away from the chatter. He ate quickly, fork moving mechanically between plate and mouth, gaze locked on his phone screen though he wasn't reading anything. 10 more minutes, and he could leave before the next wave of students arrived. He stood, tray in hand, and turned toward the disposal bins. When someone entered through the far doors, laughter followed. Shouts. Russel. Jirren didn't need to look to confirm it. The air shifted again. A hush fell over part of the room. Girls adjusted their hair. Guys nodded in acknowledgement. He was magnetic. Always had been. And now he was here. Jirren lowered his head and quickened his pace, weaving between tables, heart pounding. But then, shit, sorry, someone muttered, bumping into him from the side. His tray jostled, but he gripped it tighter, jaw locked. And in that brief delay, they passed each other, shoulders almost brushing. The contact didn't happen, but it felt like it did. Russel slowed. He turned, brows furrowed. Jirren ducked his head, eyes on the floor, forcing his feet to keep moving. He didn't break stride until he was out the door and down the hall. His palms were slick with sweat, chest heaving. He didn't dare look back. Back in the cafeteria, Russel stood frozen, the noise around him melting into a muffled hum. He stared at the now empty exit. The boy who had walked past him, no flinch, no glance, no effort to pretend. Just cold avoidance. Russel frowned. He was used to people noticing him, used to the subtle shifts in behavior when he walked into a room, used to being the one who commanded attention. So why the hell was that boy walking away? Russel turned to his friend beside him. Who was that? Who? The one who just left. Hoodie. Pale. His friend shrugged. No idea. Probably a freshman. Russel didn't answer. His gaze lingered on the cafeteria doors. His curiosity ignited, and from deep inside him, a thought he hadn't meant to speak slipped out under his breath, low, sharp, and laced with unfamiliar frustration. Who are you? Jirren needed a book. Not just any book. The final copy of Historical Foundations of Political Thought. Renting it from the library was mandatory for his upcoming assignment. He'd stalked the campus catalog first thing that morning, confirmed it was the only remaining copy, and timed his visit between classes to avoid the incoming flocks of students and group assignments, because he couldn't afford distractions. Not here, not now. He arrived at the library's old wing just before the clock struck 2 p.m. The hall smelled of dust, aged paper, and polished wood, a blend that reminded him of summers spent devouring novels as a boy. The faint sunlight that drifted through the high windows created vertical stripes of light and dust motes dancing in the gaps. This wing was seldom used early in the semester. Most students stuck to the new wing, but Jirren needed peace and space, a place to feel invisible. He walked slowly past tall oak bookcases, running his fingertips along the spines, scanning call numbers like hunting for a hidden treasure. His heart beat steadily under the rhythm of his breath as he reached the political science section. The label, JR 301, JR 350, glared at him. He bent to scan the shelves. Spotting the missing title in the entry for JR 315, he stretched for the top shelf where the last copy sat, nearly out of reach. The spine peeked out from between Philosophy of Law and Modern Ethics, its cover spine faded but still readable. Jirren took a small step to the stool beside him, placed one foot, and tiptoed up to grasp the book. His fingers just brushed the worn paper cover split slightly at the spine. The moment he felt its weight, his chest eased slightly. Relief, he thought, will be enough to bring me back to equilibrium. That's when he froze. A hand came in from behind, warm and solid, almost brushing his fingers. He stared at nothing. Unheard. My breath is locked in my throat. The familiarity of the warmth, of the silent presence, nearly slammed him against the shelf. His heart jammed in his ribcage, his pulse pounding wild and insistent. It's been 10 years. That sound. That presence. Unmistakable. Russel. He didn't realize he'd gone still, until the tip of his shoe scraped against the stool. The scrape echoed in the silent room like an alarm bell. Looking for this? A voice, calm and low, brushed his ear. The hand lifted the book to Jirren's height, sliding it into his hands with a quiet click. He looked down to see Russel Marquez standing beside him, tall, poised, slightly damp from the rain outside. The black t-shirt clung to his shoulders, hair still pressed early by the storm, and those hazel eyes, some flicker of surprise and amusement mirrored in them. Jirren stopped breathing. The book pressed against his chest, but his fingers remained limp. Keep it, he wanted to say. But keep him, he couldn't. In that moment, they were dwarfed by the tall aisles. The silence in the library swelled around them, thick and watchful, as if it sensed the tension between the two. Keep it, he muttered finally, his voice tight, brittle, as if he'd swallowed broken glass. He turned away fast, not daring one glance in Russel's direction. His feet carried him away to the next aisle, as his heart thrashed beneath his ribcage. He heard the stool clatter to the floor behind him. It echoed like an abrupt exit. Russel blinked. He stared after Jirren's retreating figure, chest taut with confusion, brows furrowed. No thanks? No glance? No flustered reaction? He remained rooted by the bookshelf for a long moment, facing the empty space where Jirren had stood. The quiet was heavy. The chalk-white walls and dusty wooden floors felt suddenly claustrophobic. What the hell? He spun around, noticing the empty chair where Jirren had attempted to reach the stool but retreated. But why? Russel's pulse quickened, replaced with a strange ache of unfamiliar territory. Thoughts rattled. What the hell just happened? He clenched his jaw, and in the end he found himself voicing the question, two words that felt sharp in his throat, yet surreal and fitting for the moment. Who was this guy? Russel couldn't sleep. It wasn't anxiety. It wasn't guilt. He'd trained himself to compartmentalize. He was good at it. Always had been. Yet tonight, he couldn't quiet the unfamiliar hum inside him. He lay in his dorm room, sleepless beneath a ceiling light that flickered faintly above. Outside, the university still buzzed with late-night study sessions, distant laughter, the hum of fans, and even occasional slamming doors. Russel stared at the ceiling. He had no reason to care. He had no reason to be disquieted. Nothing about Jirren Lane, class of 2030, should matter to him. Russel had never noticed until he did. But now the memory of Jirren's avoidance haunted him. The silent refusal to acknowledge. He turned, letting his legs drop from the bed. His own feet hit the cool wooden floor with a soft thud. The room felt charged, electric, as if the space between his bed and the window held all the questions he couldn't shake. He moved to the window and looked out over the green campus lawn, bathed in pale moonlight, at the faint outlines of other dorms. Everywhere he turned, he saw echoes of that moment in the cafeteria. Jirren's hoodie, the light cigarette-burned tips of his hair, the way he navigated the corridor like he'd mapped every inch of it to avoid this dorm entirely. He should stay away. He should let this blow over like the others did. He was always the center people forgot quickly. He was used to the unspoken rule. Russel Marquez was untouchable and unbothered. A university golden boy. Except, not tonight. Something about Jirren's calculated distance had broken through. He shook his head. He had asked around. Anyone who knew the freshman talked about Jirren. Quiet. Calm. Academic. No club affiliations. No friend groups. No spotlight. No scandal. In short, a wallflower. Nothing remarkable. Yet something about his front row freeze in the lecture hall. His dinner table avoidance in the cafeteria. The rushed departure in the library incident. Each incident flashed through his mind as pieces of a puzzle with no edges. And the edges were all reaching toward Jirren. He pressed his back against the cool window. Anger bubbled. Frustration. Possessiveness. Self, too. Because who refused Russel Marquez? A challenge? An affront? An insult? A dare? The air around him he recognized. The same kind of pull he'd felt when someone looked away while walking past him. That rush of being desired yet denied punched him with an addictive thrill. He turned from the window and began pacing. It shouldn't matter. But curiosity had spiraled into something else. Needed. He slid down to lean against the desk, flicked open a zip lighter he always carried habit. His thumb stroked over the flicker of flame. He studied it, finding focus there. Then he snapped it shut as Colin stirred from the top bunk. Colin's dark hair fell forward, one arm flung across his forehead in the half-light. "I know that look," Colin murmured, blinking awake. "You're intrigued." Russel paused. He didn't often answer Colin. They weren't friends. Mere roommates by assignment. Accidental. Now damp sweat of midnight anxiety clung to his collared shirt. "I'm not," he said automatically. Colin rested his chin on the railing and fixed him with a half-amused gaze. "Yes, you are. That shade of curious dip behind your smile. Don't try to lie." Colin had been there weeks before. The roommate everyone feared would be silent and standoffish, but he turned out to be observant, like Russella, lot like him in that way. Russel clasped the lighter shut once again, cradling it in both hands. "She refuses me," he said, softer than he intended. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't laugh. Doesn't grin. Doesn't even check me when I walk by." Colin hummed. "So that bothers you? Most people would take that as a no." Russel looked down. His voice betrayed him. He's not like most people. Silence. Colin propped himself up, curiosity lit. "What does that mean?" Russel exhaled sharply. "I don't like it being easy." He hadn't wanted Jirren to notice. Wanted him to think he was invisible. The thrill of making someone feel small, being seen cared for. He was used to that, but Jirren's silence felt different. It felt intentional, calculated, perfectly controlled. He had to understand why. He found himself digging through a campus directory website at 2 a.m., refreshing his search. Jirren Lane, double major, international affairs and creative writing. Resident of St. Marie's Hall, GPA 3.89. He clicked profiles and timeline events. No scandal, no headline, no taglines. But when he hit student stories under the international affairs page, his pulse jumped. There it was, a photo of Jirren at last semester's alumni night, smiling, cozy, surrounded by friends. But 2 weeks ago, rumored to have declined invitations that Russel and his inner circle extend to all promising freshmen. Others were at parties, networking events, but Jirren didn't show. Why? He was cursing himself internally. Because he hadn't noticed Jirren's absence from the campus social circuit. Jirren had deliberately distanced himself in many spaces: contact group, library groups, study dates. He perched his chin in his palm. Curiosity deepened into something more. He slumped into a swivel chair. "Okay," he muttered. "I'll see." The next day, he altered his usual route across campus. No surprises. From the long hallway of the art building, he casually slid into the library wing 10 minutes after Jirren likely left. He leaned against a pillar near the exit, framed by 2 aisles of dusty bookshelves. He waited. Nothing. He scratched his head. He pressed forward through the aisles, around corners, between tables. Then he saw him. Jirren sat alone at a back table, surrounded by stationery and underwater biology notes he hadn't yet needed. Maybe he planned ahead. Maybe he pretended. Jirren glanced up as someone passed, never locking eyes. Then he buried himself back into his books. Russel advanced slowly, patting one step, twice, twisting the coin in his pocket. He stopped behind Jirren's chair, 2 steps enough. He let the silence drag. Jirren paused, pen stilling. Russel looked down at his notes for a moment. "Need a pencil?" he said softly, holding up a fresh blue mechanical one. The same brand Jirren used. Russel always paid attention to details. Jirren blinked once, then shook his head. Russel put the pencil on the table. "Quiet space too crowded?" Jirren turned his head just enough to blink, but didn't meet the gaze. "It's fine," then returned to his notes. Russel leaned a little still. Maybe you want the top floor lounge. Less traffic. Jirren stiffened. I'm fine. Russel paused. All right. He backed away. Jirren felt himself let out a breath he didn't know he'd held. Russel left. His footsteps slowed but didn't stop. Jirren's notebook shook slightly from the wind of Russel passing. Later that afternoon, Russel waited outside St. Marie's Hall, near the vending machine corner. Jirren stepped out, sipped iced tea, drenching the hall dim and silent. They stood 4 feet apart. Russel let the silence stretch. Finally, he spoke. Nice tea brand. Jirren swallowed. It's fine. Another beat. Maybe see you around. Jirren didn't flinch. He moved on. Colin's earlier words echoed to Russel. He remembered he was intrigued. Russel went home that night with few hours of sleep ahead of him. He imagined Jirren's footsteps in libraries, the soft brush of his hair, the tenor of his voice when he refused. He imagined the quiet flicker of Jirren's eyes when he didn't want to be seen. He imagined what would happen if he claimed that reaction. When he drifted off, he thought. He wanted to unravel him, to get beneath that still surface, to see what would happen if he forced Jirren to look at him. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. The sky wore a dull gray blanket, promising rain, and Jirren's mood matched the atmosphere, muted and defensive. He had just finished his sociology class, a lecture filled with theories about social behavior and human conditioning, and the irony of it wasn't lost on him. If they could measure avoidance as a psychological strategy, he'd be the poster boy. His steps were brisk but calculated as he exited the building. His fingers clutched his notes, knuckles white, backpack slung tight to his frame like armor. He was heading to the west, gate the path less taken this time of day, hoping to avoid the bustling courtyard, and more importantly, the drama club's recruitment booth. He already knew Russel was stationed there. He'd seen the flyers, heard the chatter, watched, from behind a pillar, as Russel leaned back lazily against the booth's edge earlier in the morning, surrounded by eager students and sycophants. Charisma wrapped around him like a crown, effortless and annoying. So Jirren had waited, delayed, rerouted his exit to a less popular corridor, slipping past people like a ghost. It should have worked. It almost did, until Fateo something crueler decided otherwise. He turned a corner near the art building, already calculating the slope ahead that led toward the west gate. The sky rumbled above, thunder growling in the distance. Just 10 more minutes and he'd be back in the dorm. Safe, out of sight, far from hazel eyes and impossible memories. He didn't see the figure coming from the opposite direction, didn't anticipate the sharp curve or the slight incline on the cemented path, and he certainly didn't expect the shoulder that rammed into his chest-guard. Jirren stumbled, his balance slipping, the edge of his foot catching on the uneven stone. He fell backward with a muted gasp, but he didn't hit the ground. 2 hands caught him, firm, steady hands at his waist. The contact was immediate. Familiar, too familiar. His breath stilled in his throat as he was righted gently, and the world around him slowed, like time decided to stretch the moment, just long enough to be unbearable. Jirren's hands hovered midair, awkward, unsure whether to push or brace. Then he looked up, straight into hazel eyes. The breath he'd been holding escaped in a rush, soft and sharp at once. Russel. He was standing closer than anyone should, his brows slightly furrowed, his hand still planted firmly on Jirren's waist as if anchoring him. His presence radiated heat, even beneath the chill of approaching rain. And for the first time since waking up in this version of the past, Jirren looked directly at him. He didn't want to. God, he didn't want to. But the pull was too strong, the current too deep, and everything in him screamed, "Don't let him see you break again." Russel's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, from mild surprise to something sharper, more focused. Jirren, frozen in place, saw it all the way. Russel's gaze swept across his face, lingering at the edge of his jaw, then flicking to his lips before locking eyes again. And there it was. Recognition? Curiosity? Or something worse? "You always walk this fast," Russel said, voice low and steady. "Or are you running from something?" The question wasn't casual. It was a scalpel meant to cut beneath the surface. Jirren flinched internally, but kept his exterior calm, controlled. He inhaled slowly, let the words roll over him, let them sting, but didn't react. His hands came up, gently removing Russel's grip from his waist. The absence of those hands was immediate, like a shadow lifting, like breath returning. He took one step back. "Excuse me," Jirren said, his voice clipped and cold. The ice in it surprised even himself. He turned to leave, move, escape, but Russel didn't step aside. He shifted slightly, but his body still blocked part of the path. Not by force, but by sheer presence. "You keep avoiding me." Jirren froze, mid-step. His shoulders tightened, his jaw clenched. He turned his head slightly, enough for Russel to see the outline of his cheek, the faint shadows beneath his eyes, but not his full expression. His voice was lower this time, precise. "I don't think about you at all." A lie, a perfect sharp-edged lie, one he hoped would cut deep enough to wound, or push him away. Jirren sidestepped and walked past him without waiting for a response. Each step was heavy, heart thundering, blood in his ears. Every inch of his body screamed to run, to cry, to throw something. But his spine remained straight, his pace steady. He didn't look back. He wouldn't. And behind him, Russel stood still, watching. Not confused, not hurt, but fascinated. Like a hunter who'd finally seen a flash of something worth chasing. His eyes weren't sad. They were dark, focused, intense, not with pain, but hunger. And just like that, the game began.